Welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll with your host, Tiffany Scott. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Hidden History of Rock and Roll.
Hello and welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll. I'm your host, Tiffany Scott. If you're new to my podcast, I do a deep dive into the behind-the-scenes stories of rock's greatest legends, how they came to be, how the records got played, and maybe some dirty secrets if we are lucky. This is your all-access backstage pass. My next guest is a 55-year music veteran in the Detroit, Michigan area, is where he comes from. He has worked for Mercury Records, ABC Records, United Artists, Chrysalis Records, EMI, and RSO. He worked with such bands as Uriah Heep, Rod Stewart, Backman Turner Overdrive, the New York Dolls, Three Dog Night, Steely Dan, Joe Walsh, the Four Tops, ELO, Maxine Nightingale, The Babys, Robin Trower, Jethro Tull, UFO, Geils Band, The Bee Gees, Eric Clapton, The King Bees, The Rockets, and Rufus. I'm out of breath. Currently, he runs Ashton Music Consulting and Ashton Entertainment Managing Broadcast Streaming Promotion. Please welcome to the show, who's left me breathless, Jack Ashton. Hi, Jack. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I like leaving you breathless. That's a good one.
Yeah.
My female fan base would definitely appreciate that.
Well, it is so awesome to have you on the show today. You have such an incredible music history with so many artists. You got started back in 1971. Can you tell everyone, how you got into the music industry?
It started for me, like you said, from Detroit, because that's where I'm originally from. This is where I grew up. At a young age, I was into collecting records and things like that. This is pre-Beatles, actually, and so that's definitely dating me. So, I was into the Bobby Rydells, the Del Shannons, and all the other pop artists of those times. The fun part is I got to work with one of them, and that was Bobby Vinton. But after I did that, and then the Beatles came out. Of course, everybody that I knew and a lot of the guys around, they all wanted to start bands because the Beatles, all the girls liked bands, and everybody. So everybody wanted to be in a band. So I was in it. We started a band, all my buddies from the neighborhood, the four of us, and it was called the Essential Five, and I was the lead singer. So that started, and I was living in. I come from a
middle class.
Thank you. Middle class family in Detroit. Then my parents moved to a place called Birmingham, Michigan, which is a very upscale neighborhood, which totally changed my life. And because I was singing out of a little microphone and an amplifier when I was in the first band. And then when I moved to Birmingham, we were singing out of columns and electric voice microphones. So I could tell that there was something happened. I moved into a much richer environment moving to Birmingham. And through that, I joined another band when I was in Birmingham called the Advocates. We did really well. We did TV here in Detroit. So that did really well. What really kind of changed things for me, being in a band or a musician was not going to be the easiest way to go here. And so I knew that from other friends that I knew, because I started working at a record store in Birmingham, Michigan, when there was real record stores, because I was there when the first Led Zeppelin album came out, things like that. And Who's, Tommy came out and things like that. But I realized that being a manager was going to be a much better thing for me. So I started managing bands in my 11th grade and 12th grade in Birmingham. And I got to the point where I was managing like 5 bands. And so they were all playing all over town. They were I was opening for like Bob Seger, Ted Nugent, and I was playing at the Brandy Ballroom. It was Iggy and the Stooges and the MC5. So through all that, what happened, Tiffany, was that I got to meet the managers of those bands. And one of the bands, obviously, which was very instrumental in what happened to me, was I got to know Punch Andrews, Bob Seger's manager, really well. And actually his road manager, Thomas Weschler. Punch was very impressed by all the things that I was doing and how I was doing it. So I really kind of learned how to be a promotion man before I was a promotion man. So Punchy got me my first record job at Mercury Records. And that was my first local job, yeah. So I got that through him. And back then, Bob hadn't broken yet. I mean, he was still just a local made talent. So, you know what I mean? He really hadn't broken yet until the Silver Bullet Band got together, because he was on Capitol, but the Live Bullet album was the one that broke Bob wide open, the live album. That was recorded at Cobo Hall, but here in Detroit, because Detroit had such a profound effect on my career, because it all through the 70s and the 80s. And after that happened and I joined Mercury, so all I basically did is just worked my ass off. Like I was breaking records left and right. Not too long after my start there, I originally went to work for the distributor, and that's a company called RJK. They're the ones that put the records into the stores, and so they would have their own promotion people working for the distributor. So when I got originally hired, I was working for RJK, which was distributor. Wasn't working directly for Mercury yet. I took over the Mercury line. I broke I Gotcha by Joe Tex right away. And then there was then I broke Uriah Heep. They were an album, or like album-oriented rock, or a rock band out of England. Back then, Lee Abrams was the first program director at WRIF in Detroit. He's a quite famous broadcaster for many, many years. That was a major feather in my hat, because there was a station in Detroit called CKLW, which is an AM station. And AM stations were very popular still back in the 70s, and very, very strong. And by getting Uriah Heep off the rock station on, and Easy Living was the name of the track, and getting it onto CKLW, that definitely did it for me after breaking that one. And so the record company hired me full time, away from RJK, and then not too soon after that, they made me regional, and regional meant that I was covering Detroit and all its secondaries in Michigan, and then including Ohio, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Rochester, New York. So eventually I got into Chicago too. But what really was more important is that the fact that I did that so quick. And then, which was kind of a little too early for me, it happened. And I ended up being Mercury's first national album promotion man. And during that first period of time, it was quite the thing that turned my head around. I was in the middle of getting married, and moving from Detroit to Chicago to become the national album director at 22 years old.
Wow.
Really blew my mind, because I did it that fast. It literally happened in a year and a half. It was all just kind of mind-blowing to me that it would happen that quickly.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah, it was. And to take on those kind of responsibilities at 22 years old, and reporting to my boss, the senior vice president, Stan Bly, and at the time, my friend Mike Gormley was head of publicity. He's a good friend of mine. He lives in Santa Monica. He manages Skunk Baxter from Steely Dan today. But anyway, it was quite unbelievable to me because everybody mostly, even in the field staff, was, a lot older than me. So here I am, 22 years old, telling these other promotion nationally to take the direction what I'm telling them to do, which was a new thing because they never had an album director at Mercury before. And this label had Rod Stewart already, and he had already broken wide open with Maggie May. It's already a big hit already. It was not too long afterwards when I joined there, became the national person. And during that time, they signed Backman Turner Overdrive. They signed the New York Dolls, including having Uriah Heep on the label. So there was a lot going on for me at 22 years old and having to deal with managers. Which was something I had to do as well. And then,
and at least you had some, understanding of how that worked because you were doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause I was a baby manager. So, but because I managed so many of them and there was so many different personalities in each band and each band had their own particular sound, it was kind of like I had my own little record label as a promotion when I was a manager for these bands. Because one was a soul band, one was a psychedelic band, one was more commercial. It was a lot of fun and just amazing. And I actually dropped out of college because besides working at the record store, being a manager, I was making more money, than a normal kid at that age. And so by the time so here I am, sitting in Chicago in my own office, being the national director of promotion for Mercury Records, having to go on tour with Rod Stewart and Backman Turner Overdrive and the New York Dolls and Uriah Heep. So it was in visiting radio stations all over the country, which I had never been anywhere else besides Chicago and the Midwest. I hadn't been to New York yet. I hadn't been to San Francisco yet. I hadn't been to LA yet. I mean, I hadn't been basically anywhere. So it was a lot to swallow at that age.
Big start.
Yeah, it became, Tiffany, a bit too much over my head, so to speak, of the responsibility of it. And as much as I liked the job and being in Chicago, and I was there when WXRT went on the air. It was there was so many great things about it that after about 2.5 years in Chicago, I ended up leaving.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So, and that continued throughout my career, by the way.
Yeah.
Detroit became the launching pad for a lot of the bands I broke through my career.
Well,
But
when we talked on the phone, we had, we were trying really hard to figure out who are we going to talk about? What are we going to discuss? And
right.
and I mentioned to you that the Babys were one of my favorite bands, and you really you have said you had some great stories about Robin Trower, and then also my other favorite was the Bee Gees. So we're going to discuss those three bands today because I know you have a ton of stories, and we could probably be here all day. We're going to have to do a part two. But I want to start with one of my favorite bands, the Babys. And can you tell everyone what year you got started with them and how you got involved with them?
So it was the year that I was living in LA at the time and had been doing West Coast regional, and then I did local out there. I worked in San Francisco, so I really had my chops down by then, and knew I had the radio connections to handle breaking a band at that point because I had gotten to know many of the major rock stations around the country. I got hired at Chrysalis Records, and I was their national album director there. And one of the first projects that I got was this band called The Babys out of England. That was a bit of a challenge too, because when the Babys first album came out, and that was the one with Isn't It Time on it, which was the big hit off that album. Of course, the pressure was not so much for me to get the single played, but to get the album played. And the problem with that was the album cover and the name, The Babys, was a big drawback. Rock radio didn't like the name. They didn't like what the band looked like, kind of, sort of a cross between David Bowie with makeup. It was a tough album only because of the appearance of the band and the name of the band. I was able to, and the label backed me up with it, is that I ended up taking John Waite, the lead singer, out on the road. And back then, the first videos that came out were on Betamax, and they were huge cartridges. Okay. So we, in these screens. And so I rented all these suites, or got all these hotel suites in all the major cities that we went to, including Detroit, Chicago, San Francisco, Philadelphia. So I took John on the road. We went to all these major cities, and we played these few videos of the band that was recorded in England. That was a major part of how it got done, because I was able to, and plus the local people that were in those cities, they invited people to the suites so they could see it, so they could meet John and all. So it was a complete promotional, push. Fortunately, the songs were right in the pocket. And the first single, Isn't It Time, became a big hit. And I'm sure you're familiar. Are you familiar with the song, Isn't It Time?
I think I've heard it once or twice.
Oh, okay. There you
I've
go.
heard it a lot.
You're a big fan. A
Huge.
lot. Okay. Yeah. So it's nice to hear that you're a fan, because in the beginning it was tough. So what we did after that, I was able to put together and follow up with what we did, and the band came over, and we went into all the same cities, and we booked into like 2,000 seaters. We basically sold out the tour. I cherry picked the radio stations to promote the concerts, in those cities, and it became very successful. And that's how basically and Chrysalis Records broke the Babys, and then that particular single broke out and became their first big hit single.
Yeah, such a good song.
Yeah.
What was it like being out with John Waite?
Well, they were all, everybody in the band. Tony Brock, Wally, the other guitar player. Unfortunately, Michael, played the organ and Hammond and the piano. He was one of the original players, and he got kicked out of the band because he was too egotistical. He got really, and so there was a lot of tension with that. But once they corrected that, as time went on, Jonathan Cain came in and replaced him. So so with a guy like Jonathan Cain, who has been in Journey all these years from that, but Jonathan Cain was in the Babys before he was in Journey. So when you have the writing capacity of a Jonathan Cain and John Waite, you have quite an amazing package, and all the rest of their rock albums after that became extremely popular. So that was a major thing that happened to the band in the right way.
Yeah, and I was always curious why they never went on to do more albums.
John was never really happy necessarily. I mean, he loved that time during the Babys, but he really felt that he was
like at his potential.
Yeah, and he really proved it. But unfortunately, the next band that he was in, they became a super group overnight, and it was with Neil Schon, and it was a band called Bad English. Jonathan Cain was in that band as well. So Jonathan was the one that actually introduced him to Neil Schon and John Waite. So they ended up on Epic Records, Bad English, and they had 2 successful triple platinum albums. John, as you know, wrote amazing ballads. His ballads were his key.
Yeah.
He was the and that voice of his is unmistakable. And that's what's carried him on all these years. And to this day, he's still out there touring, and he's out there by himself doing all his songs of all his hits, So fortunately, the Babys were just not what he was happy doing for a long period of time. But the years that they did do it, each album got better and better.
So do you have any favorite stories about working with the band, or maybe on tour with the band?
Well, can't tell you anything unusual about it, except the fact that they were all very hardworking guys. I mean, Tony Brock, the drummer, ended up being the drummer for Rod Stewart for quite a few years and tours. Wally, unfortunately, the other guitar player, the rhythm guitar player, because John played the bass guitar for quite some time during the Babys. And then he ended up off the guitar and went on, this being the lead singer. But no, they were just, the girls were going crazy. It was the typical, because all the guys were really good looking. So the women went cuckoo for them every time they played, so it was that kind of thing in the beginning. I remember when we were first getting started, there was a radio station in town. It was the first rock station in town in LA to play them, and it was called K-West, KWST. Because I couldn't get KMET and KLOS on the record. And so K-West played it first. And actually, Rodney at K-Rock was a big fan of the Babys. So,
oh, wow.
Not a lot of people know about Rodney or K-Rock. Well, K-Rock maybe.
Oh, yeah.
K-Rock's still on the air. But Rodney was a big deal in Los Angeles and carried a lot of weight back then. Rodney was a big fan of the Babys, so that did help. In Los Angeles. Yeah. It was the typical girl crazy type of situation, girls backstage wanting to get in, coming to the hotel, trying to find the band. The usual things that happens. I mean, once we get to a band called Def Leppard that I worked at Polygram, and I was on tour with them. I mean, forget about that.
Oh, God.
Women were like freaking everywhere. I mean, it was like, it was
crazy.
Wow,
Now, those are the fun stories we like to hear.
Oh, yeah. I mean, these bands become so freaking popular. And
when you're singing right to women, first of all, you're playing an instrument, which most women find very sexy to begin with. And then you're singing a song to them, like Every Time I Think of You. It always turns out good. That's all they want. That's all they want is to hear.
Oh, yeah.
All they want to hear from their guys. So they kind of get a little cuckoo, I think, but in a good way.
Yeah, they get all excited and stuff like that.
I can tell you, I've heard stories that even the unattractive guys, like maybe someone from AC/DC, has women everywhere. I mean, everywhere. It's the talent that draws you in most of the time.
Yeah, it does. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of guys too that act completely crazy too. In most cases, it was the women. I mean, I can tell you.
We saw the Beatles mania, Beatlemania. I mean,
well, yeah, and honestly, it was kind of a little bit. I don't want to say it was anything near like the Beatles, but it was like baby mania.
Right.
The girls went crazy for the Babys. They liked them. They liked, if anything, the women liked the name of the band. The guys hated the name.
Oh yeah, it was kind of an odd name.
The guitar player and the drummer are still out touring in a makeshift Babys band with another lead singer that sings like John and stuff like that, and backup singers. So it comes off, but it's never going to be right without John Waite singing. It's his voice, and he's quite charming. Honestly, he's that's why it was when I met John initially, when I was at the record company in LA, I could tell how charming he was, and he was like that with everywhere we went, with men and women. He at all the meetings, going to radio stations for interviews, at these things we did at the suite with the video. He knew how to do it. He really was. He had that charming effect, and plus his English voice, his English accent. I know they had him at some beach house for some time as we were setting up all this to happen. The video tour with me taking John out and going out to do radio station interviews. But we actually planned the tour to happen in all the same cities. So we were, we basically had the plan in place, that we were going to go out and do this tour in all these major cities and do this video explosion because, video screens and Betamaxes were still very, like the hip thing. No one really had one, or you had to have a lot of money to purchase one. So it was a great way to promote the band at the time. These days, you can see anything because of the social media. But I mean, back then, that was a big deal.
So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about your time working with Robin Trower. And I'm going to ask you again, what year did you start working with him, and how did that come about?
Like the Babys, I was at Chrysalis Records, and Chrysalis was really special because they had quite a lineup of major artists already that I was able to get involved with, tour with, get to know. The Babys was a brand new act, and so that was not to say that the other stuff wasn't work, but the same thing is that, trying to break a new band, that was a lot of work. But when you size up somebody, because Chrysalis already was a pretty popular label out of England, and then came to the United States and started their U.S. stance here. Chrysalis was Chris Wright in England and Terry Ellis. That's how they came up with Chrysalis. Chris and Terry Ellis, Chrysalis.
I love that. I love history.
See that? There you go. So you learned something new today. That's how they came up with the names between the two principal prints. Chris Wright, he ran the English office, and then Terry Ellis came to America, who's English, and came and worked the LA office, and that's who I worked directly for. They had Robin Trower on the label, who was already huge from his album Bridge of Sighs. They had Jethro Tull, they had UFO. They had such a back history, Procol Harum was part of it 10 years after. These are all bands that were on Chrysalis in Europe. And they didn't necessarily end up on Chrysalis in America. They ended up in some other labels in some places prior to the LA Chrysalis Records opening up. So Terry took parts of the band, English bands, to America, and one of them was Robin Trower, which I was extremely excited about because I've been a guitar hero type of guy all my life, and because I like guitar players. And Jeff Beck happens to be my all-time favorite. Unfortunately, I was never able to work with Jeff, but I met him a couple times. But Robin Trower was right up there, because his first album, Bridge of Sighs, was just amazing. And I grew up listening to that when I lived in Detroit. Robin was always an album artist. He never had any hit singles. So it was always rock radio. And as you ended up finding out, which really, no one really knew this, or no one really talked about it. One of the reasons I liked Robin so much was that there was no drugs around ever, because you ended up finding out by looking it up that Robin was a Christian. So was Jimmy Brewer, the lead singer and bass player.
Right.
And it was only a 3-piece, and it was quite just exceptional to be hanging around these guys. I mean, everybody was clear as a bell all the time.
Wow.
So it was one of the easiest relationships I ever had with an artist. He was truly a gentleman all the time. So was Jimmy. I really didn't have much to do with the drummer. So I just, Bill, I forget what Bill's last name was, but anyway, he was a drummer during the time, but he was a big part of the group. But without Jimmy Brewer on voice, on vocals, and his bass playing, and Robin's amazing guitar playing, I mean, it was just magical. And he was such a gentleman with everybody. So there's a lot of rock bands out there that, I can name that few that, say Motley Crue or Guns N' Roses, who their reputations are just for what they are. They're insane, basically. They're crazy people, drunk and drugged out. And so when you're dealing with somebody that is always straight and will get up at any time of the day and can talk clearly.
Right. Get to a radio station by 6 or 7 a.m.
Yeah, well, whatever was asked of them that they could do that was, under circumstances that it wasn't a problem, was never a problem. So it was one of the most refreshing things that I ever worked with in my career. And plus the fact that how brilliant were on stage. I mean, so I just give Robin a tremendous amount of credit for the way he handled himself and the way his popularity was, because Robin ended up being, he was playing in big arenas and things during the course of my working with him. And so now he still tours and he's still alive. Unfortunately, Jimmy's no longer with us. And so he's gone to different singers and different drummers. But Robin's still here and still rolling and touring. But it's funny, he just played when he plays those 2,000 seaters that I was telling you about where I broke the babies.
Wow.
So that's where Robin tours today. But he's got this amazing following. So I'm just pleased to see that Robin's still doing well, and is that he took care of himself, and he's well into his 80s. So, and he's still playing that guitar like as if he's still that younger Robin Trower that I knew. That's.
And I know it's really not an industry question that I'm asking you, but we were talking about girls prior to this, so that's why I'm going to ask you. But that he was a Christian, he was married. I know he was married to his wife for a very long time. Did they have a similar situation with girls, hanging out, or did that just not? Was that just a big no?
No, this was a male crowd. This was a guitar god crowd. People that. Guys liked Robin Trower.
Similar to Rush, maybe?
Yeah, sort of like a Rush thing. Yeah, I mean, because Rush was a 3-piece and totally, I mean, in the beginning, I got to work with Rush just for a short period of time at Polygram, but the Rush, that was a male audience, but they got so big that even the girls liked them, but it wasn't because they were attractive looking. They weren't an attractive band.
No.
When it came to the guys, and nor was Robin. But some of Robin's ballads touched the girls, and so if they did, where Rush didn't necessarily do ballads, unfortunately, because they never had any hit singles. So that's a good comparison, because that's exactly what that you can compare Robin Trower's popularity to probably at that time to where Rush ended up.
I was a big Rush fan myself, because I learned to play the drums for a few years, and
oh yeah,
and
Neil Peart, boy, he can't beat that boy. He was something.
Right.
He was good. Yeah. Mercury had Rush first, and but they were signed after I had already left Mercury. But
well, I'm really glad that a lot of the bands, and this is a very general statement, a blanket statement about a lot of the bands like Tom Petty and other, I'm glad that the fans saw something and they liked it, or the band said, you know what, we're going to continue on, even though maybe a record executive didn't particularly care for either a high voice or the way that the jacket and the bullets looked on Tom, or it was like, I'm glad they stuck with it.
Yeah. Well, Tiffany, there was always that politics going on inside the record company. I mean, I can tell you during the 70s and 80s that as amazing as years of we'll never see that kind of activity again, because it was being able to do record promotion and work with these talents during the 70s and 80s was remarkable because of the bands that came out of those years. I feel very honored that I was able to be part of that history. I remember Rush's first track was "Fly By Night."
Gosh, yes.
All I can remember is going "Fly By Night."
Yeah, I can't
Yeah, I
sing at
know.
all, so you don't want to hear me sing.
No, I know, but I mean, they could never do an edit on any of their songs because they were so friggin' long.
Anyway,
So,
yeah.
And I don't think Geddy Lee and the band, from what I understand, never really cared about having a hit single.
No, they just wanted to do what they wanted to do, and they did it really well.
Yeah, well, Chrysalis tried a few times with Robin. They tried. But the few times they tried, the songs were okay, but they felt uncomfortable. Because after hearing Robin's guitar playing and things like that, and then you try to put it into a melodic type of ballady type of single, it just didn't sound right. So it was better that he stayed as a rock artist or an album oriented type of artist. It worked better. Just like Rush, same thing. Good comparison.
We're gonna totally switch gears here and talk about the Bee Gees, which I'm really excited about because I mean, I grew up listening to them and was a huge fan. And when disco, they were, people were trashing their records at the baseball field and that whole thing.
Well,
I mean,
that was
theirs from beginning to end is really crazy. I want to hear more about your time working with them.
The interesting thing about the Bee Gees is that, of course, I didn't work with them then, but they had I don't know if everybody out there knows this, but the Bee Gees had quite the career and hit singles prior to being in part of the disco era. Before Saturday Night Fever, they were a successful pop band, the three of them. They had multiple hit records. And then when the whole disco thing came together, Robert Stigwood, my meeting with the Bee Gees was that I was at RSO Records, which was the Robert Stigwood organization. And Robert Stigwood signed the Bee Gees, and they had this movie soundtrack coming out called Saturday Night Fever. And pretty much everybody that knows anything about Saturday Night Fever, at that particular point in time, it was the biggest selling album of all time. I mean, that soundtrack was huge. And there must have been besides the Bee Gees having hits on it, there was at least Don Elliman, and there was a few other ones that had some tracks on that album that came out. But the Bee Gees, they became at the time, disco was like through the roof, and they became the kings of disco. Even everybody, like Rod Stewart came out. Do you think I'm sexy with a disco song? Even I think I forget which song the Stones did. But they came out with a disco version of a song. I mean, all the people tried to do their own little version of it so they could be in that clique of the disco world. I think a lot of the executives realized that this particular format was not going to. There was some radio stations that actually went disco during that period of time. They would play nothing but disco type of music. Unfortunately, that didn't last long. So they became the disco kings, and they were unbelievable. I have to say that I've worked with a lot of talented people in my time, and the Bee Gees are right up there. Like Chuck Negron just passed away the other day, and I worked with Three Dog Night, and they were an arena band back in their day. Now it was with ABC Records when that happened, but the Bee Gees were just, oh, Jesus. I mean,
they were huge.
Talk about the women. The women were completely insane about that band. The disco era was, it was about wearing their clothes. It was everything. But the Bee Gees had this thing and this look on stage and this magnetism. Barry Gibb was a god. He was this beautiful looking guy with this long flowing hair and this amazing high voice, like the rest of his other brothers. They just had this unbelievable stage presence when they sang on stage. And the three of them, their voices were like insanely good.
Yeah.
Even their little brother, Andy, was amazing. Unfortunately, Andy ended up passing away early in life because drugs got him. These were right in there during the whole that whole disco thing was a huge cocaine time in America.
Yes.
There was a lot of drugs going on, and cocaine was at the top of the game. And that was the drug of choice back in the disco days. And, as far as the guys are concerned, and I know you asked me about this, is that they were brothers. Yeah, they would fight amongst themselves. And you asked me this other question. What they would do sometimes is, they would turn their mics off, or they would just walk away from the mic. And because their voices were so strong, Tiffany, they could sing in a stadium, and you could hear how cool and refined their voices were. Besides singing on mic, it was kind of their harmonies. They were just dead on it. And they were perfectionists. They were just a lot of heavy meetings coming out when their records were coming out, even after Saturday Night Fever. Because I worked the records after Saturday Night Fever, and they just kept going.
Which records did you work specifically?
No, well, Spirits of Flown was one of the albums I worked after the Saturday Night Fever thing. It was, they were automatics. You took a Bee Gees record to a radio. It was like Beatles. They were like the Beatles. The radio stations would add the record as soon as they got it,
Right.
And they were like, back then there were 45s. Or like, people all know about 45s.
Right.
But yeah, that's another thing, I used to have, that was a thing we had to do in every market. And I remember doing it as a local promotion guy, having like the sales guy or the branch manager of the record company in each town. We would set our times and our watches on what time we would get, okay, we're going to deliver the record to all the radio stations. Everybody would take a Bee Gees record or whatever, and everybody had a designated radio station to go to, and we would all get there at the same time, like at 2:00, to make sure everybody, so no one could get pissed. Radio station got a record before the other radio station in town. My God, you didn't want to go there.
And that's a good strategy.
Well, yeah, it was something that you had to protect yourself from, because if you're walking around with some of these type of talents that were so friggin' huge, you had to time it out to make sure they got it. I had to do that quite a few times with the Geils Band. People would get really mad.
Yeah.
The radio station, you didn't want to play favoritism. The radio stations, you had to play even all the time when you had big artists like that, to make sure everybody got the record at the same time.
And they were just unbelievable. Saturday Night Fever stayed on the charts from 1978 to 1980, and they stayed in the top 100.
It's like Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. It's one of those type of records from artists. I saw something the other day, like the Eagles' Greatest Hits is the best-selling album of all time. That's as of today. And I'm sure that Peter Frampton had that same thing with his live album. He was big as something like that. You had to treat it with very carefully.
Right.
And plus, the record company would completely freak out if there was any screw-ups. So in some cases, they would double ship product into all the record store outlets, because back then there was there was branches all over the country. Capitol had a branch, Warner Brothers had branches where they would ship in their own amount of records into their branches. And when they would do that, what that would do is that would certify them gold immediately and or platinum immediately.
Yeah.
It was a trick.
Oh, you're giving some secrets.
Yeah, I gave you one there. So if a record company like, say, even RCA, who had branches at one time, or Capitol, or like I said, Columbia, the bigger record companies, all of them had branches in all the major markets, and that means they had their own warehouse. And that way they could ship the amount of records into their own branches immediately. And back then they didn't have sound scan. So they weren't being sound scanned. So when you reported how many records were shipped to Billboard, well, there you go.
There you
And then
go.
the RIAA, you went gold or platinum. You didn't necessarily sell that many immediately, but you were. So
Yes,
it was
I
quite
totally understand what you're saying. You're saying it without saying it.
yeah, it
Wow.
was quite the trick. Yeah, but it worked. At the end of the
At
day,
the end of the
they
day.
all went.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they all did go triple platinum or
Mhm.
gold. Back then, everybody wanted to do it immediately. Looked like they could put it in full page ads in Billboard or wherever, R&R or whatever. Yeah, we went platinum and, within the first 48 hours or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Which really wasn't true, but it ended up in the case. It did end up
Right.
being true.
Yeah.
But,
And
that was just the way it was back then.
well, I have a question regarding
Yeah.
the Bee Gees, and how did you personally feel when that whole fiasco went down at the baseball field and, death to disco?
Yeah, Steve. Oh, yeah, he was a fruitcake. That guy. I mean, I'm sure he's still around today, but he was insane anyway. So he was kind of like the Howard Stern before Howard Stern.
Got it. Yeah, got it.
That's my comparison of Steve Dahl. Steve Dahl is what Howard Stern ended up to be.
Yeah.
Doing crazy things. Howard Stern doesn't do that anymore, but he used to be pretty nuts. I was not pleased with that.
Well, it was,
I
it
think
was sad.
that it was sad, and plus it put a dark cloud over the Bee Gees.
Mhm.
And for the longest period of time, the Bee Gees couldn't release any records because no one was buying them. It put a very bad cloud over the guys, and it was not fair to them because they didn't create disco. They were just part of it, and they had the most successful run at it.
Mhm.
But they weren't disco guys in the beginning. They weren't disco guys after disco. But it hurt them because people were blowing up disco records, and they blamed the Bee Gees for it. But what Barry continued to do is write songs for Barbra Streisand. I mean, if you look up Barry Gibb, he's written so many hit songs for so many people. In some cases, he's sang duets with them. He did a duet with Barbra Streisand as well.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
But so some of the things that the Bee Gees, unfortunately, were blamed for, but really wasn't their responsibility. It was just something that they did at the particular time with Saturday Night Fever, and it became actually John Travolta, who was in the movie. He had a backlash to it too.
Yes.
Huge backlash as an actor.
Yes.
And then, unfortunately, Sylvester Stallone wanted him to make a Saturday Night Fever 2, which was not anything to do with RSO Records. And that was a total failure. And it was the worst thing that could have ever happened.
Yeah, we won't get political or anything here, but if you look it up, if you read about it, if you don't know prior to what happened to that, it's really sad. But
it really was because
the Bee Gees were great guys and had most beautiful voices and made some really beautiful music.
That's how it should have been, period. But unfortunately, people like Steve Dahl and the people that were, they were looking for a reason to rain on that parade. And
I still think that the Bee Gees are one of the best groups out there, and they're just among the top bands out there.
Yeah, hey, they were bigger than life when I met them. Okay, they were just as charming as people.
Well, cool. Well, we're going to move on to the fan questions. All right, Jack, this is Steve from Cincinnati. Years ago, I used to work in the music industry. Who was your favorite artist to work with?
After so many of them to work with, B.B. King has to be one of my favorites, besides, obviously the Bee Gees and the Babys and all that. But, working with such legends like B.B. King, and sitting backstage with him as he's tuning up his guitar, Lucille.
Wow.
That was mind-blowing to me. And he called me, "Okay, son,
Oh, yeah.
okay, I guess we're going to get going here on this show." BB was class. He's another one. And plus, unbelievable legends. When I had the opportunity to meet people that were already huge before, I had anything to do with them, and I was lucky to help break some BB King singles, throughout my career, but nothing that could, shine on what a legend like that is. So I'd have to say BB King. One of my other top people that I got to meet and work with was Quincy Jones. I went up to his house in Bel Air, sat in his living room with him.
Nice.
And the funny part about that one, Tiffany, is that when you're sitting with Quincy Jones in his living room, he had his record company, Quest Records at the time. He wanted me to help release some of his records to adult contemporary radio, which was something that I was involved in as an independent. And Quincy Jones asked you this question. So, Jack, how are we going to do this? So he asked me,
right,
how we're going to do it. So Quincy Jones asked me that question. I'm going, I'm going to remember that.
Oh, God. Yeah, forever. That'll be ingrained.
Forever. That's ingrained in my skull.
Right.
So quite amazing, And Quincy would call me at home just to check in and say, how are we doing this week? I'd give him a report.
Wow. That's really insane.
I wasn't working for a record company at the time. Actually, I was representing Quest Records, his record company, working for Quincy. And reported back to him personally. It was quite insane. I could never find him because I knew he was where he was, but he would change his name at the hotels. He didn't use his real name when you check into hotels. I always had to wait for him to call me.
Okay. Got it. My next question is from a super fan, Jerry Lynn. Hi, this is Jerry Lynn from Chicago. My question is, out of all the groups you have worked with, which group was the hardest and most difficult to work with and why?
I struggle with that a little bit, but the one that sticks out of my mind, it's unfortunate because my relationship with him in the beginning was really good because he used to come to my house in the beginning and we used to hang out together, and that's John Cougar Mellencamp.
Oh, no.
This is before Hurt So Good and Jack and Diane. And just at the cusp of them coming out. John was on a label originally, on a David Bowie label on RCA when he had his first record come out. That's how he picked up the name Cougar, John Cougar. And eventually he dropped the Cougar, but the Cougar stuck with him for quite some time. So that's why, when he came over to Polygram, that's why he was John Cougar Mellencamp. John was, kind of a smart ass, very egotistical. I didn't find him hard to work with. He listened to me, but he had his own way. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
And if you check out his historical background, you'll find that he's never been very easy to work.
Yeah, so, I've heard.
Yeah,
stories,
he got worse. He's got worse through the years.
So. Well,
so and Kenny Arnoff, the drummer. He was the original drummer in John's band. And Kenny is now like the most sought after drummer in America or any place, actually. He's so popular. He plays with everybody. But I ran into Kenny and he was telling me that, John's not an easy thing, but he goes out and if the tour is set and Kenny can do it, he does it, he gets paid and just moves on. You don't get into arguments with John. You'll never win.
Okay.
That's just the way it is.
All right. So I'm going to move on to another Steve. Hi, Jack. My name is Steve Boyton. When the Bee Gees turned off the microphone, was it harmonious or was there sibling rivalry?
It was harmonious. It was very much in harmony. They were a family that when they were doing business and when they were singing, they were in sync. They took whatever personal differences they had between their brothers. It never came on stage. They were true professionals.
And then when they weren't when they weren't singing, when they weren't on stage, was it good between them or did they have their moments?
Well, they had their moments, yeah. Just like any brothers, they fight with each other. It was always about writing, basically, or the lyrics. I mean, there's other people that had more personal intake to that because my boss, Al Corey at RSO Records, was in all those meetings with the band. And there was always a lot of picking the songs for the album, picking what songs should go first or second or third, or even setting the set lists up, sometimes became an issue on how they were doing their shows. So brother rivalry is always going to be there. It is, nothing's perfect when it comes to that. But when it came to business, these guys were at the top of their game. They showed total professionalism when they were on.
That's really good to hear. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to the final fan question. Hi, Jack. My name is Mark Glansman from Cambria, California, and I want to know which artist taught you the most valuable lesson about the music business?
I'm going to give John the credit because he was one of the, and Rob and Trower, those two guys, they were very clear about what they were looking for, and they taught me some class. They taught, some of these artists taught me class, and how to be even a better promotion guy. Like even Quincy Jones. Class carries so much for your career. I know even your dad would tell you this, Tiffany, is that you treat people with class and dignity, and you're going to go a long way. I know that a lot of my counterparts that were promotion people like me, I had to particularly stay away from drugs and alcohol throughout my career, because you would get fired. If you drank and did drugs in front of managers or on the road and road managers, that stuff goes right back to your boss. And you had to watch what you were doing all the time. So you didn't want to be partying heavy with the band, unless it was in a particular situation where it was much more private. You had to be very careful.
Sounds like those people taught you some really good lessons.
Having your dignity and class, and working with people, and honestly, even with the people I didn't like, whether they were radio people or managers or even bosses, I learned that it was better to bite my tongue and to stand back from it than to continue fighting about it, because it didn't matter if I had won the argument, it would have been not good. I learned how to back off, and that was a tough one to do.
Yeah, that's tough for a lot of people.
I had to learn how to back off from confrontation and drama. I'm not a drama person, so it was probably good. My mother taught me how to do that. I don't get involved with drama. I just go out and get it done.
That's good.
That's my motto.
Well, that's good to hear, and that's a great note to end the show on.
Yeah.
I was so excited to hear your story. I read, your story on Facebook, and we've met so many times at the music industry reunion parties.
Yeah.
And it was great to finally get to hear all your stories.
Yeah. There's many more in the Naked City here.
Yeah. Well, we'll do it. We'll have to have a part 2.
If you get time to, but hey, Tiffany, you're fantastic. I really appreciate this, and I really appreciate the time you've given me today. And
it was a blast.
It's been very charming to meet you. Yeah, you'll always get the real lowdown with me.
Okay.
And plus, everything so much has passed, so I can say all this.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jack. Take care, and we'll be
very
talking
welcome,
to you
Tiffany.
soon.
We hope you enjoyed the latest installment of the Hidden History of Rock and Roll. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on all the podcast platforms. Thanks for listening to the Hidden History of Rock and Roll with your host, Tiffany Scott.